Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Back to Ashes. I am your host, Phoenix. To the elites, thank you so much for your dedicated love and support of the channel and myself. The love and dedication is reciprocated. To get some things squared away, this is not an AI channel. I actually use my own voice to record, I edit my own videos, and upload them to YouTube. So, if you are new to the channel and you begin to like what you are hearing, please leave a like, a comment, and maybe hype the video. And if you would like to join the Back to Ashes family, please hit that subscribe button and set your bell icon to all. That way you'll know every time I upload a video. With all of that being said, it is now time to go back to ashes. For once we arise from the ashes, we are a bigger, brighter, stronger, and a happier person every day. Sit back, relax, kick back, grab a snack, or tuck in and get warm, and prepare for your dose of vocal melatonin entitled True Crime Volume 16. Right after this intro, there will be an ad. Somewhere in the middle of the first case, there will be an ad. And after that, there will be no more ads within this video. The cross-dressing cannibal, serial killer Haddon Clark. Haddon Clark was named the cross-dressing cannibal by the media and is held at the Eastern Correction Institution East in Westover, Maryland, as inmate number 937151. He is currently serving a 60-year sentence for the murders of Michelle Dorr, 6 years old, and Laura Hoddingling, 23. According to prison authorities, Clark told another inmate that he killed as many as a dozen young girls and women along the East Coast from the 1970s to 1993. The year Clark was first arrested for murder. Clark believes the long-haired, bearded inmate he confessed to is Jesus Christ, so he felt compelled to declare his sins. The murder of Laura Hoddingling. Laura Hoddingling was a Harvard graduate who vanished from her home in Bethesda, Maryland, in October 1992. Investigators discovered Clark had mental health issues and had done gardening for the Hoddingling family on occasion. On October 18, 1992, Clark was gardening for Laura's mother, Penny, who accused Clark of stealing tools. Clark entered the house through the back door and used a kitchen knife to stab Laura to death in her bedroom while he suffocated her with a pillow. He wrapped her in a bedsheet and carried her through the woods, burying her within a half-mile of her home. When moving her body, he accidentally left a bloody footprint on the pillowcase. Later, he returned dressed in women's clothes and a wig to make the neighbors think Laura had left the house alone. A month later, authorities arrested Clark after discovering the fingerprint on one of Laura's pillowcases. Clark loved sending police on wild goose chases, and authorities searched several locations in central New Jersey after Clark had told them he buried them in a place where he had spent his childhood. It referred to multiple victims. Clark confessed, pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in June of 1993, and 8 months after her murder, he led police to Laura's skeletal remains buried in a shallow grave off Interstate 270 in Old Georgetown Road, close to her home. Because of Clark's cell talk with his prophet in jail, he also became the primary suspect in the murder of little Michelle Dorr. The murder of Michelle Dorr. 6-year-old Michelle Dorr was last seen on May 31, 1986, at the home of her father, Carl Dorr, in Silver Spring, Maryland. She was dressed in a pink and white polka dot bathing suit, and her father saw her heading toward the turtle-shaped plastic play pool in their backyard. At that time, Clark was staying with his brother, a neighbor of the Dorrs, and living in the basement, only 2 doors away from Michelle's home. Following his daughter's disappearance, Carl Dorr broke down under the authorities' pressure and confessed to killing her. He later recanted, saying he was in a nasty divorce with Michelle's mother, and after his daughter went missing, he had a mental breakdown. He remained the primary suspect in his daughter's case despite his retraction. In 1999, authorities utilized mitochondrial DNA to identify Clark in the disappearance of Michelle. Mitochondrial DNA is only shared between mother and child, and though less conclusive than nuclear DNA testing, it is used when nuclear DNA is inadequate or old. Investigators contracted a private laboratory to which bloodstains from the upstairs bedroom floorboard of Clark's brother's home after Clark had moved out. According to Clark, Michelle went to his residence looking to play with his niece. Clark took Michelle upstairs and used a chef's knife to slash her throat, then tried to sexually assault her corpse. He claims he drank her blood and ate a piece of her flesh, then stuffed her in a duffel bag. 14 years after her death, Clark led investigators to her body in the year 2000. He buried her in a park about 12 miles from her own home. More murders? Based on Clark's many claims, the FBI began investigating unsolved child homicides in Connecticut and surrounding states. Clark was a suspect in at least 4 other unsolved homicides, but there is a reasonable chance there could be more based on what Clark has told others. On July 26, 1974, a young girl followed an agitated, barking dog to the decomposed body of an unidentified woman in the dunes of Provincetown, Massachusetts. The remains were not far from a road, and there was substantial insect activity. Police estimate she died approximately 2 weeks before being found. The young woman was face down on a beach blanket. Because a struggle did not appear to have happened, investigators theorized she was either asleep when attacked or knew her killer. Wrangler jeans and a blue bandana were found under her head. Her toenails were painted pink, and she had long red hair pulled into a ponytail. Both hands and one forearm were missing. She was nearly decapitated, possibly by being strangled to death. One side of her head had been crushed, police believe, by a military-type entrenching tool. Her head injury caused her death. A postpartum sexual assault had also occurred. Clark confessed to murdering dozens of victims, beginning when he was a teenager. He claimed in a 2004 letter that he killed an unidentified woman from Cape Cod, Massachusetts, in 1974. Nearly 50 years after her murder, in November of 2022, she was identified as Ruth Mary Terry. Although Clark admitted to killing Ruth, authorities concluded it was actually her husband, Guy Moldavan, who was charged with her murder on August 28, 2023. Clark worked in Provincetown on Cape Cod for a time. He confessed to killing several women there and drinking their blood. He claimed that he buried one of his victims in a dune after cutting off her hands at the wrist, referring to Ruth Marie Terry. He said he used her fingernails as fish bait. Keeping trophies. Clark began cooperating with authorities and promised to lead them to the bodies of Michelle Dorr and Laura Hoddington. However, he had one request to comply. He wanted them to buy women's clothing for him to wear. The FBI agents went to Kmart and purchased women's pants, a skirt, a bra, and a wig. At the time, Clark was 47 and wore women's clothes and a wig while leading investigators through the woods to the body he claimed he had buried there decades before. On December 15th, in the year 2000, Clark led investigators to his grandparents' former property, where they discovered a plastic bucket with more than 200 pieces of jewelry inside, including Laura Hoddington's high school class ring. Are the other pieces of jewelry trophies from other victims? Are his stories about other victims true? Based on the information, one could surmise that Clark has been operating as a serial killer for longer than is believed. Early life. Haddon Irving Clark was born July 31st, 1952, and raised in Troy, New York. Clark came from an affluent family, and his grandfather served as mayor of White Plains, New York. Clark's father was a Korean War veteran with an MBA and PhD in chemistry. He is credited with inventing fire retardant, carpeting, and plastic cling wrap. His wife, Flavia, was a homemaker. Clark's family was a dysfunctional one. Both parents were alcoholics who emotionally and physically abused their 4 children. From a young age, Clark began bullying other children and torturing animals. Clark's mother would dress him in girls' clothing when she was inebriated. She also called him Kristen. As a result, Clark began to identify as a woman and dress in women's clothes. When he became an adult, he attended the famed Culinary Institute of America for 2 years and eventually worked at upscale restaurants, hotels, and cruise ships. However, mental illness would plague him, and his employment was frequently terminated. At one point, he went into the Navy, but they diagnosed him as being a paranoid schizophrenic, and he was immediately discharged. He eventually became homeless and drifted to Maryland. In 1984, Clark's brother, Bradfield, murdered his dinner date, Patricia Mack. He strangled her and used a brick to crush her skull. Then, he cut her body up into pieces in the bathtub and stuffed them in plastic bags. He cooked her breasts on the barbecue and ate them. He was later filled with remorse, confessed to the police, and is currently serving time at a high-security prison in Vacaville, California. A ruthless killer. The authorities asked Clark why he killed his victims, and he told them that he believed if he drank their blood, it would transform him into a woman. It's unthinkable that the Clark family could have had 2 sons so deranged. Only in nightmares do cannibals exist. When Clark was sentenced for the murder of Michelle, her mother had tears in her eyes when she said, "Sometimes you have to go to hell to find the devil." Timothy Bleefnick, from Family Feud contestant to wife murderer. Marriage is no joke. Some things are not joking matters, like marriages and relationships. In 2020, Timothy Bleefnick of Quincy, Illinois, appearing with family members on the television game show Family Feud, became infamous for his off-the-cuff, insulting answer on national television that appeared to indicate his regret over marrying his wife Rebecca, who did not appear on the show. Although he laughed and joked about his answer, it appears that he was likely telling the truth. Bleefnick filed for divorce in 2021. Both he and his wife had temporary restraining orders against each other. On February 28, 2023, his wife's body was found by her father after she failed to pick up her children from school. Timothy and Rebecca, married since 2009, were estranged and living apart. She had been murdered, shot 14 times at close range. The murder came amidst a contentious divorce and fight over custody of their 3 young boys, ages 12, 10, and 6. Bleefnick told police he thought his wife was the victim of a violent home invasion. However, he was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of home invasion in June of 2023. He was sentenced in August of 2023 to life in prison without the possibility of parole. A slip of the tongue? What's your biggest mistake you made at your wedding? Host Steve Harvey asked Timothy Bleefnick during filming of the game show Family Feud in 2020. Bleefnick replied, "Honey, I love you, but," said I do. "Not my mistake, not my mistake. I love my wife. I'm gonna get in trouble for that, aren't I?" Rebecca Bleefnick. Rebecca Bleefnick, 41, was an award-winning nurse who, in 2020, received praise from the Daisy Foundation after assisting a woman whose husband was headed for emergency surgery. with gangrene and sepsis. The woman had not been allowed to see her husband because of coronavirus restrictions. But before he was taken in for surgery, Rebecca made sure she got to see him. Rebecca was a certified trauma nurse and a sexual assault nurse examiner who worked as a traveling nurse during the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic. She also did volunteer work for an animal rescue group. Damaging internet searches. During Timothy Beliefnick's trial in May, Quincy Police Detective Eric Cowick testified for the defendant's internet search history included the following: how to open my door with a crowbar, how to make a homemade pistol silencer, can you wash off gunpowder residue, what is the average Quincy Police Department's response time. Prosecutors said he attacked his estranged wife 9 days after riding his bicycle to her house when he spotted another man's car parked outside. Beliefnick went home and ran a check on the license plate of the man's car, untimely learning that it belonged to someone his wife had been dating for several months. Ironically, his internet searches, which were his attempt to try to avoid detection by police, ended up being the most potent circumstantial evidence against him. Beliefnick arrested after shell casings found at his home. Beliefnick was arrested on March 13th, over 2 weeks after police had executed a search warrant at his home, where investigators recovered a number of shell casings matching those found at the scene of the murder. Rebecca's sister, Sarah Riley, testified during the trial that she received a text message from Rebecca that read, quote, "If something ever happens to me, make sure the number one person of interest is Tim. I am putting this in writing that I'm fearful he will somehow harm me, come after me, or will try to do something to me that takes me away from the kids, or the kids away from me. He already has lied multiple times to point himself as a victim and me as the perpetrator, when it is obviously the other way around." When autopsy photos of Rebecca's body were presented in court, Beliefnick appeared to wipe tears away. Beliefnick opted not to testify during the trial. He also did not present any witnesses or evidence. The divorce was contentious, to say the least. The only way the defendant had to make sure the 3 boys chose him over her was to eliminate her as a choice. Josh Jones, Adams County Assistant State's Attorney. You researched this murder. You planned this murder. You practiced this murder. You broke into her house and you shot her. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 times. I don't know how long it took you to do that. Some of those shots were fired while she was lying on the ground, and you did all of that while your children were upstairs at your house, lying snug in their beds. Judge Robert Adrian. Mike Williams, alligators blamed in murder of Florida duck hunter. What happened to Mike Williams? It was a frigid morning on December 16, 2000, in Tallahassee, Florida. Mike Williams left his home at around 3 a.m. to travel to Lake Seminole, about an hour away. It was duck season, and he wanted to be on the water before dawn to get his spot at first light. Mike told his mother, Cheryl Williams, that Lake Seminole had always been an extraordinary place for him. By late afternoon, Mike's wife, Denise Williams, began calling around and asking if anyone had heard from or seen him. He failed to return home after the trip as promised, as it was his marriage anniversary. She called her father and a friend named Brian Winchester to look around the lake. The search. Denise's father and Brian Winchester found Mike's truck parked along the shoreline at a remote boat ramp. Nothing appeared to be amiss, but Mike was nowhere to be found. William's brother, Nick, and dozens of friends went to the lake to search. They were joined by officials from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, along with 2 helicopters and airboats. Late that night, Mike's best friend, Brian Winchester, found his boat. The gas tank was full, and Mike's duck decoys had never been used, meaning he could not have been on the water long. Officials searched for days and turned up nothing. On day 10 of the search, a searcher found what looked like Mike's hat floating on the water. They searched for an additional 56 days and could not find his body. It would not be hard to drown in Lake Seminole by hitting a tree stump. Officials and even experienced hunters speculated he drowned and addressed the terrifying possibility that Mike was eaten by the many alligators there. However, that theory was erased due to the weather. A cold snap brought the temperatures down to the 20s the night he vanished. Fish and Wildlife Officer Alton Renew said alligators' metabolism decreases, and they don't eat when it's that cold. They hibernate for the winter. 6 months later, something else surfaced. His hunting jacket with his hunting license inside and high waders were found. The clothing had no tears or bite marks, so an alligator attack was ruled out. Meanwhile, Denise had filed to have Mike declared legally dead. A Ling County judge granted Denise's petition based on the recovered items and the assumption that alligators and other wildlife had eaten him in his entirety. The court decision permitted Denise to put a claim on her husband's life insurance policy, for which she received $1.5 million. Mike's early life. Jerry Michael Mike Williams grew up in Bradfordville, Florida, north of Tallahassee. His mother was a daycare provider, and his father was a Greyhound bus driver. They raised Mike and his older brother Nick in a double-wide trailer. They opted not to build a house and saved their money so their children could attend the private North Florida Christian high school. Mike was an exceptional student who was active in the Key Club and served as student council president. He also played football. Mike was a child who was always in a hurry, his mother told Cold Case Files. He never walked, he ran. At age 15, Mike began duck hunting. It was around that time he started seeing a fellow student named Denise Merrill. After attending North Florida Christian, Mike attended Florida State University, majoring in political science and urban planning. Before he graduated, he was hired by Ketchum Appraisal Group as a property appraiser. According to the group's owner, Mike was the hardest working person he ever saw. Mike married Denise in 1994. Their daughter was born in 1999. Mike was a dedicated father who often came home from work to eat dinner, then returned to work as a real estate appraiser after his wife and daughter went to bed. According to his mother, Mike was making $200,000 a year and bought a home in a stylish subdivision on the east side of Tallahassee. Mike was a good, honest person, Cheryl told A&E. He always worked for everything he got. Mike's father died in mid-2000. Shortly after, Mike and Denise bought a $1.75 million life insurance policy through his friend Brian Winchester. Brian was a childhood acquaintance of Mike and Denise, and Mike's best friend. 2 days before Mike vanished, he and Denise told his brother Nick and Mike's mother that they planned on having another child soon. Denise also said they planned to cruise to Hawaii that spring. Mike also planned on traveling to Jamaica for work. There was no reason why Mike would ever walk away from his life. Rumors and development. Investigators felt the facts in Mike's disappearance were inconsistent with the alligator theory. But regardless, the case went cold. There was one person who was not satisfied with the search: his mother. Cheryl believed her son might still be alive, but she wanted police to investigate. She requested help from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, or FDLE, in 2004, who finally agreed they would initiate an investigation. By then, in 2005, rumors began to swirl. Denise had received her share of the life insurance policy and married Brian Winchester, who had divorced his wife a few years earlier. They even remained residing in Mike's house. After the wedding, FDLE investigators began focusing on Denise in Winchester. Cheryl Williams told officials that Denise threatened that she could no longer visit her granddaughter if she continued to pursue the investigation. When Cheryl told Denise, "I couldn't stop this investigation if I wanted to," Denise kept her promise and no longer let Cheryl see her granddaughter, Ansley. Case closed. By 2006, investigators no longer returned Cheryl's calls, and she became agitated. In early 2007, FDLE closed the case. They were convinced the alligator story was not true, but they had no leads or evidence in the case that would allow them to continue investigating. However, a new lead was developed in October of 2007. Michael's older brother found a photograph and serial number for a Ruger .22 caliber pistol that had once belonged to their father. Michael had inherited it after his father's death, and it was the only firearm not returned to former in-laws by Denise when Michael was declared deceased. Agents from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, or ATF, visited Denise and Winchester's house to interview them. Several days later, their attorney brought the gun to FDLE, and it was sent to the state forensics lab for DNA testing. The couple have never been vocal in the case, even though Brian Winchester was Michael's best friend. However, on the anniversary of Mike's disappearance that year, the Winchesters made a public statement. Quote, "For 7 years, we have prayed and hoped to find out what happened to Mike," Brian said in an email to the Tallahassee Democrat. "Nobody wants Mike found more than we do." Lobbying efforts. Cheryl would not be dissuaded from continuing the search for her son despite the FDLE investigation coming to another close. She became frustrated with FDLE, believing they were incompetent and lacking interest in solving the case. On New Year's Day in 2012, Cheryl began writing one letter per day to Governor Rick Scott, requesting another agency to investigate or assign a special prosecutor. She wrote over 200 letters without acknowledgement and began to inquire why. It turned out that the governor's office had forwarded the unopened letters to FDLE, where they were placed in the case file. Cheryl was distraught. "They could not have hurt me more if they had punched me in the face," she told the Tallahassee Democrat. Break in the case. In 2012, Denise and Brian separated, supposedly because of his sex addiction. She filed for divorce in 2015. In August of 2016, Winchester abducted Denise at gunpoint. Investigators thought Winchester was going to kill her to stop her from telling officials what she knew about Mike's disappearance. This was the break authorities had been waiting for. Winchester was arrested for kidnapping, domestic assault, and armed burglary, but his attorney was able to maneuver a deal for him. If he showed the police where he buried Mike's body and told them the truth about Mike's murder, they would only charge him for the abduction of Denise and not the murder of Mike. Winchester was sentenced to 20 years in prison for the kidnapping of Denise in December of 2017. He is now serving his sentence at Madison Correctional Institution in Rayford, Florida. His release date is July 30th, 2036. Discovery of the body. Mike was not mentioned at Winchester's sentencing. However, State Attorney Jack Campbell told the media that he had hoped that the Winchester case would somehow solve Mike's disappearance. It would later be found out that Winchester had reached an agreement with prosecutors before the sentencing that they would not pursue a life sentence on the kidnapping charge. Further agreement details between Winchester and the prosecutors had never been released. The following day, FDLE's special agent in charge, Mark Perez, announced Mike's body had been found, and his death was determined to be a homicide. Afterward, the FDLE released that Mike's remains were found within 5 miles of where he grew up, at the dead end on Gardner Road in northern Leon County. His DNA matched his mother's. FDLE disclosed that they had received information about the location of the body in early October 2017. County Works employees utilized backhoes for what they were only told was an exercise. They dug for 5 16-hour days in 9 feet of mud at the corner of the lake. During the effort, they had to hold back the lake water by dams and pumps while working amidst water moccasins and eels. On October 18, 2017, search dogs and investigators found Mike's remains in mud with plywood, stacked on top only 5 miles from his mother's home. According to the Tallahassee Democrat, 98% of his bones were located and remarkably preserved, including his clothing, winter gloves, and booties. Wife's arrest. On May 8, 2018, Denise Williams was arrested at Florida State University, where she was employed. She was arrested when she left work to celebrate her daughter's 19th birthday. Only hours before, the grand jury had indicted her on charges of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and accessory after the fact. Winchester had testified before a grand jury that he and Denise had planned to kill Mike for the insurance, and that they had been lovers for 3 years before Mike was murdered. 2 FDLE investigators went to notify Cheryl of the indictment. 2 days later, the 3-page indictment was released. In it, investigators believe that Denise began to conspire with Winchester in March of 2000, only 9 months before Mike vanished. Winchester is alleged to have shot Mike with a gun. Denise's lawyer, Ethan Way, said Denise had nothing to do with Mike's murder and that Winchester acted on his own. Way entered a not guilty plea. The trial of Denise Williams. In late June 2018, Denise was held without bond, and her trial date was scheduled for September 24th. The court played audio of Winchester's interview. In the recording, he admitted to pulling the trigger of the gun, but that it had been Denise's idea. Her attorney argued that the tape should not be entered into evidence because, despite Winchester admitting he murdered Mike, he was not charged with anything. The court denied the motion. Winchester was the state's star witness against Denise and testified at length that he and Denise had never ended their high school relationship, even after both married. Denise made it clear she would never get divorced, primarily because of appearances, because she is ultra concerned of how she appears to the world, Mike told investigators. She wanted a scenario where it was an accident. Winchester described in dreadful detail how he pushed Mike from his boat, hoping his waders would sink him. When Mike resurfaced, he circled the boat around him several times. Then, He shot Mike in the face with a shotgun, later burying him in Leon County. I wanted to get something to hide his body, so I got a tarp and a shovel, Winchester told the court. While it took nearly 18 years to get the real details behind Mike's disappearance, it only took a jury 8 hours to find Denise guilty of first-degree murder, a life sentence with no possibility of parole. The prosecutors had proved Denise was the mastermind. On November 25, 2020, the court reversed her first-degree murder charge, and the accompanying life sentence was reversed on appeal. However, the charge of conspiracy to commit murder remains active with a 30-year sentence. Denise is serving time at the Florida Women's Reception Center in Ocala, Florida, with a release date of October 17, 2046. A mother's dedication. Mike would not have been found without his mother's courage and grit, which kept this story alive for so many years. Cheryl refused to believe alligators had eaten her son in a duck hunting accident. Shortly after her son's disappearance, Cheryl visited Lake Seminole looking for hope. She told A&E, quote, "I was standing on this little board out on the water, and this voice came to me, just as clear as a bell, and it said, 'Mike is not in Lake Seminole. You have to find him and bring him home.' So I thought Michael was alive. She set out to find her son and would go to any length. She put up billboards around town, placed newspaper ads, and even stood on street corners with signs. I just did what any mother would do," Cheryl told the Tallahassee Democrat in 2020. "If I had known he was dead, I wouldn't have been able to do what I did." Cheryl sat in the courtroom listening to the gruesome details of how Michael was clinging to a stump in the water as his best friend shot him in the face. The pain a mother feels losing a child is beyond comprehension, and Cheryl is no exception. Quote, "He was a good person, a friend to everyone, and now, at night, when I go to sleep, the last thing I see is Michael, clinging to a stump in the middle of that lake screaming for help, and I wasn't there to help him," Cheryl told A&E in a taped interview. "And it's what I have to live with." Cheryl also lives with the loss of her granddaughter, whom she has not even seen since she was 5 years old and is now an adult. "I would love to have my granddaughter in my life, and there are a million things I would like to tell her about her daddy, but the main thing I would like her to know is he loves her more than life itself." Dale Harrell and Marissa DeVault, Web of Deceit. It was around 2:45 a.m. on January 14, 2009, when in Gilbert, Arizona, police received a distressing 911 call from a woman in deep distress. She reported that her husband had strangled her and tried to sexually assault her. Rushing to the scene, police officers found the front door wide open, and moments later, a frantic woman emerged. She bore bloodstains on her forehead and in her hair, but when questioned about her injuries, she claimed the blood was her husband's. The distraught woman was Marissa DeVault. An officer entered the residence and proceeded to the master bedroom, where he discovered 34-year-old Dale Harrell. Dale lay naked, face down on the floor, bleeding profusely from the head, and thrashing his arms and legs while moaning in pain. A blood-soaked pillow adorned the bed, and a blood-stained claw hammer rested on the bedside table. Dale was urgently transported to the hospital, where medical professionals revealed the extensive damage to his shattered skull. Remarkably, he clung to life, requiring extensive surgical intervention. Dale and Marissa's story had its origins in their teenage years in Lake Havasu, Arizona. Though they lost touch, they reconnected in their 20s while both living in Phoenix. Marissa, who already had a child from a previous relationship and worked as an exotic dancer, found in Dale a promising partner who assumed a fatherly role for her daughter. Initially, the case seemed straightforward when Marissa asserted that she knew the identity of the assailant. She pointed the finger at Stanley Cook, claiming that he had attacked Dale with a claw hammer in response to Dale strangling her and attempting sexual assault. Marissa maintained that Stanley had saved her life. During interviews with investigators, Stanley admitted to the attack, asserting that he had rescued Marissa. However, he also disclosed that he suffered from memory problems resulting from a motorcycle accident, complicating the situation. Investigators swiftly grew suspicious of Marissa's narrative. The evidence found at the crime scene contradicted her account of events. Bloodstains indicated that Dale had been assaulted while laying on his left side in the bed, alone, making it impossible for Marissa to have been beneath him as she claimed. Moreover, the blood splatter on Marissa's clothing was consistent with someone swinging an object repeatedly over their head. Adding to the intrigue, during her initial police interview, there were moments when Marissa chuckled while reenacting her alleged witness of Stanley striking Dale with the hammer. Faced with the incongruity of the evidence presented by investigators, Marissa eventually broke down and confessed to repeatedly striking Dale over the head with a hammer as he slept alone in their bed. She claimed that her motivation stemmed from enduring years of verbal, physical, and sexual abuse inflicted by Dale. Marissa faced an indictment on account of attempted second-degree murder, but managed to post bail. Tragically, on February 9th, Dale's body succumbed to his injuries, and he was pronounced dead at the hospital. Despite surviving the surgery, he had been weakened by a stroke and 2 heart attacks, never regaining consciousness. Blunt head trauma was listed as his cause of death. A mere 8 hours after Dale's passing, Marissa had a distressing 911 call, reporting that she was stranded in a field, unable to move. She recounted being attacked while out jogging near her home at around 3 a.m., with Stanley once again identified as the assailant. During Stanley's questioning regarding the assault on Marissa, investigators noted mud on his jacket and blood on his pants. Stanley explained that the mud came from his SUV, and the blood resulted from his bitten-off fingernails. Forensic experts seized his pants, shirt, socks, and shoes as evidence. Marissa was subsequently arrested at the hospital and charged with first-degree murder, marking Gilbert's first homicide case since 2007. The case, to say the least, was profoundly perplexing. By this point in the investigation, authorities believed that Marissa had killed Dale and that Stanley was not implicated in any way. Stanley, deeply distressed by the situation, expressed his frustration, stating to the Arizona Republic, quote, "I killed someone, tried to confess for my crime, and no one believes me. If that's not a sign of complete failure, I don't know what is." At this point, Marissa had already admitted to the assault on her husband. During her interrogation, she expressed her exhaustion at having to explain the multitude of bruises and fractured bones she had endured at Dale's hands. She conveyed her weariness with the screaming matches that occurred beyond the children's hearing and sight, concealed behind closed bedroom doors. In her account to investigators, she revealed that the first instance of Dale's violence occurred 1 month and 3 days into their marriage, triggered by his displeasure at her refusal to take his last name. According to Marissa, the altercation resulted in a fractured skull and a hospitalization. During her hospital stay, she alleged that medical professors treated her injuries and provided her with literature on domestic violence. Marissa asserted that she initially left Dale but returned after he agreed to attend counseling. However, she recounted that the cycle of abuse resumed within 3 months. She disclosed to investigators that she had been hospitalized multiple times due to physical abuse. On the day of the attack, she claimed to have handed Dale divorce papers. Later that evening, she said she declined Dale's sexual advances, leading to an argument. During the night, she woke to find Dale pinning her down and choking her. According to her account, Dale raped her, and after the assault, she retreated to the bathroom. There, she said that she decided that she would put an end to the abuse once and for all. Marissa said that when she emerged from the bathroom, Dale was asleep. Fueled by a surge of emotions, she grabbed a hammer and, in her words, lost control. She explained to investigators, quote, "I said, 'You don't own me.' And I just hit and hit with both hands, and I just kept hitting him." Marissa maintained that her intention was not to kill Dale, but that she had become carried away. She also claimed that Stanley had offered to take responsibility for the attack to prevent their children, ages 13, 6, and 6, from losing both of their parents. As the interrogation concluded, Marissa emphasized her desire to avoid spending the rest of her life in prison and leaving her daughters without a mother. As investigators delved into the history of the couple, they encountered a troubling absence of any records corroborating Marissa's claims. No police or hospital records substantiated the incident she described, and there were no documented reports of domestic violence. However, court records did reveal a lawsuit filed against Marissa, Dale, and Stanley in November, alleging breach of contract, theft, and fraud. The lawsuit detailed how Marissa and Dale had been renting a home with an option to buy it, but had ceased making lease payments. Stanley, despite having his claims discredited, and Marissa's comprehensive confession, repeatedly confessed to killing Dale. He even presented a notarized written confession to the Gilbert Police Department. However, when investigators declined to arrest him, citing evidence pointing towards Marissa as the assailant, Stanley revealed that the letter had initially been intended as a suicide note. He claimed to have had Marissa's permission to end his own life. Later, he confessed that he was unaware of any plan to kill Dale, but indicated that, following the attack, Marissa had devised plans to raise funds for legal fees and secure their daughter's welfare. At this juncture, investigators suspected that the alleged attack on Marissa had been staged to facilitate insurance fraud. They uncovered that the original plan had involved Stanley inflicting a spinal cord injury on Marissa, but they ultimately abandoned this idea due to its severity. This led to the decision for Stanley to assault Marissa instead. Upon being confronted with this theory, Stanley readily confessed. He admitted that after learning of Dale's death from his injuries, Marissa had taken pain medication, and he subsequently assaulted her, striking her face with his fists and shattering her ankle with a sledgehammer. He then transported Marissa to a field near her home and left her in the mud before departing. No charges were filed against Stanley in connection with the beating. Despite efforts to investigate the allegations of abuse, investigators struggled to uncover any supporting evidence. Neighbors attested that Marissa and Dale appeared to be an ordinary couple, displaying no signs of abuse. Moreover, investigators discovered that Marissa had been involved in an affair with a man she introduced to friends as her stepfather's former lover. The individual was Alan Flores, a wealthy businessman, 20 years Marissa's senior. Following Marissa's arrest, she provided the names of several individuals who she claimed had witnessed the abuse she suffered at Dale's hands. However, her assertions could not be substantiated by any of these supposed witnesses. In fact, a woman who was both a friend to the couple and a nanny for their children categorically refuted Marissa's claims. Amy Dewey, the nanny, expressing her strong belief that Marissa had murdered Dale for financial gain. During her time living with the couple as a nanny, Amy observed Dale's extremely caring nature, not only toward Marissa and their children, but also toward her. In an interview with 3TV, she recounted, quote, "I was a stranger, essentially to him, but he was good enough to let me live there when I needed a place to go and took care of us all." Amy disclosed that the only abusive behavior she witnessed within the household came from Marissa, who constantly provoked arguments with Dale, while he consistently tried to defuse the situations. Amy severed all ties with Marissa due to Marissa's verbal abuse directed at her. On one occasion, Marissa approached Amy and shared a disturbing claim that Dale had been having dreams of engaging in sexual acts with her and then murdering her with a hammer. Amy harbored profound skepticism about Marissa's allegations. In another interview, Jeffrey and Kelly Kirshen, former friends of the couple, characterized Marissa as dishonest and attributed the deterioration of the relationship between the two pairs to Marissa's behavior. Marissa had asserted to investigators that Jeffrey and Kelly had witnessed Dale abusing her. But when questioned, the Kirshens vehemently denied this accusation. Instead, they asserted that Marissa lived in a fantasy world. During early March, Dale's parents, Danny K. Harrell and Marlene Harrell, initiated a wrongful death lawsuit against Marissa. They further petitioned that Maricopa County Superior Court to compel Marissa to surrender Dale's remains to them. In their legal action, attorney William Udall stated, "In spite of her actions causing his death, defendant refuses to release Dale's remains to his parents." At this time, Dale's remains remained in a Mesa mortuary. Additionally, his parents sought punitive damages from Marissa for her role in causing Dale's death. Subsequently, it was disclosed that the prosecution would pursue the death penalty against Marissa. In mid-April, Deputy Maricopa County Attorney Eric Basta submitted a notice to the court outlining 3 of the 14 criteria established by state law that made Marissa eligible for capital punishment. This notice marked the first indication of a motive from the prosecution. It alleged that Marissa had killed Dale with the intent of financial gain in an especially heinous, cruel, or depraved manner, carried out in a cold and calculated fashion, devoid of moral or legal justification. Prosecutors posited that Marissa had murdered her husband to secure an insurance settlement that would alleviate her dire financial circumstances. Marissa was subsequently deemed competent to stand trial on charges of first-degree murder. The judge ruled that she possessed sufficient comprehension of the court proceedings to contribute to her defense. As both sides prepared for trial, Marissa initiated a medical malpractice lawsuit against Maricopa County jail officials, contending that following her ankle injury prior to her arrest, a doctor had failed to accurately diagnose an infection in her leg. As the case progressed through the justice system, a significant revelation emerged. Marissa, who had initially asserted as she attacked Dale in retribution for abuse, later altered her account, claiming that the assault was an act of self-defense. The trial commenced in February of 2014, with both the prosecution and defense presenting starkly contrasting portrayals of the woman facing trial for her husband's murder. The prosecution contended that Marissa had murdered Dale to secure an insurance settlement, arguing that the fact was premeditated. They highlighted inconsistencies in Marissa's account of the attack on Dale and emphasized that the individuals she claimed were witnesses to years of abuse had not corroborated her allegations. Conversely, Marissa's defense attorney, Alan Tavasili, stood by her assertion that she had endured abuse and maintained that the murder was an act of self-defense. Early in the courtroom proceedings, graphic photographs depicting Dale lying unconscious in a hospital bed following the attack were presented. In these distressing images, Dale exhibited 2 black eyes, a partially shaved head, and a surgical scar bisecting his temple. His right cheek and temple bore the marks of the claw hammer blows. Dr. Joseph Zabromsky described the efforts made to save Dale's life, including the removal of blood clots, extraction of bone fragments, and irrigation of brain tissue to repair microscopic tears sustained by Dale. A somber silence enveloped the courtroom as the doctor recounted how Dale had succumbed to a pulmonary embolism. Following this grim testimony, Judge Roland Steino called for a recess. Once the jury exited the courtroom, Marissa broke down in tears. She was escorted out of the courtroom, with Judge Steino warning her defense team that unless she could maintain composure, she would be removed from the proceedings. The jury heard testimony from Alan Flores, with whom Marissa had been having an affair. He revealed to the jury that a few weeks prior to the murder, Marissa had confided in him about her desire to hire a hitman to kill Dale. According to Alan, Marissa disclosed that Dale had subjected her to physical abuse and expressed her desire to remove him from her life. Allegedly, she mentioned either paying someone to kill Dale at a casino or planning to kill him herself in a casino hotel room. She purportedly intended to claim self-defense after he allegedly attempted to rape her following a night of heavy drinking. Alan recounted to the jury, "I kind of chalked it up to an odd fight of sarcastic fancy." It came to light that Marissa had owed Alan nearly $300,000 in loans, and he was 2 decades her senior, working as a business management consultant. Their connection had originated on a website catering to arrangements between sugar daddies and younger women facing financial hardships. Despite knowing that Marissa was married, Alan decided to involve himself with her. He extended financial assistance when Marissa and Dale encountered financial difficulties. Marissa had repeatedly assured Alan that she was expecting substantial sums from a $1.8 million insurance settlement following her father's purported death and a $7 million trust fund her father had established. However, it eventually became evident that Marissa had deceived Alan. Her father was, in fact, alive. Nevertheless, it was Alan who had posted her bail after her arrest, had subsequently loaned her an additional $50,000 upon her release. Alan testified that he deeply cared for her and recognized that she was in grave trouble. He also admitted to harboring fears that Marissa might harm him during their involvement. Under cross-examination, it was revealed that investigators had searched Alan's residence following Marissa's arrest and discovered evidence of child sex abuse images. Attorney Tavasoli insinuated that Alan may have made incriminating statements regarding the hitman in exchange for immunity from prosecution on the child sex abuse allegations. County Attorney Bill Montgomery clarified that Allen could still face prosecution for child sex abuse images. Testimony during the trial revealed that Marissa had indeed taken out 2 life insurance policies on Dale, amounting to nearly $300,000, almost equal to her debt to Allen. However, her defense contended that she would not have received any of the insurance money because the policies covered accidental deaths. During the trial, it emerged that after Marissa had admitted Stanley's non-involvement in the murder, she informed investigators that Stanley had entered the bedroom upon hearing the commotion after she had struck Dale several times with the hammer. She claimed that Stanley had taken the hammer from her to prevent her from continuing the attack. Stanley was expected to be a pivotal witness during the trial, as he had witnessed part of the assault. However, when called to testify from the witness stand, Stanley professed an inability to recall that night, citing the passage of 5 years and memory impairment due to organic brain damage. Despite his memory loss, Stanley did recall that, to his knowledge, Dale had never been abusive to Marissa, even though he had lived with the couple. He also stated that he had never witnessed Dale being abusive toward the children. There was only one individual who corroborated Marissa's claims of abuse, Rhiannon, the couple's daughter. She testified that the household had been fraught with turmoil, and she had frequently witnessed her father abusing her mother. However, during cross-examination by the prosecution, Rhiannon conceded that Marissa had also been abusive toward Dale. Additional photographic evidence was introduced, including images of Marissa's manicured nails and minor bruising. Prosecutors argued that this evidence suggested no struggle had occurred. During the closing arguments, prosecutor Eric Basta asserted, "The cold hard truth is the defendant planned to kill Dale, and she did it. The motive was money." He emphasized that the severity of Dale's injuries and the extensive blood splatter in the bedroom indicated Marissa's intent to kill her husband that night, supporting a first-degree murder charge. The defense, on the other hand, contended that the evidence demonstrated a crime of passion, constituting second-degree murder or self-defense. The defense attorney stated, "There are a lot of things you might not like about her. This is not a popularity contest. She's not running for cheerleader." After closing arguments, the jury ended deliberations. If they found the claims of abuse credible, they could reach a compromise verdict, potentially avoiding a first-degree murder conviction. The jury deliberated for 4.5 days and ultimately rejected the defense's claims of abuse, returning a verdict of guilty for first-degree murder. As the verdict was read, Marissa remained expressionless. The same jury was now tasked with determining whether Marissa should receive the death penalty. A sentencing hearing would establish whether they were aggravating factors in the case, as required by Arizona law for a death sentence. Prosecutors argued that Dale's murder was exceptionally cruel and driven by financial gain. They announced that they would not call any witnesses during the sentencing phase, believing they had presented sufficient evidence during the trial. They emphasized the cruelty of the attack, pointing out the fist-sized hole in Dale's head and the frenzied nature of the assault that left the entire bedroom covered in blood. Additionally, Dale had endured 3 weeks between life and death before his passing. If the jury were to find one or both of these aggravating factors, the defense would then introduce new witnesses and mitigating evidence from Marissa's past to persuade the jury not to impose the death penalty. During the sentencing phase, the jury found that Marissa had killed Dale in an especially cruel manner, making her eligible for the death penalty. They were unable to reach a decision on whether Marissa had killed Dale for financial gain. The trial transitioned to the next phase, where Marissa's defense aimed to save her life. Before presenting mitigating evidence, prosecutor Eric Basta told the jury that the case revolved around life choices and anticipated that Marissa's defense would bring up abuse within the couple's home. He referred to Rhiannon's earlier testimony, in which she acknowledged that abuse occurred in both directions, not just from one party to the other. Although Marissa did not testify during the trial, she made a statement during the sentencing phase. Tearfully, she pleaded for mercy, expressed remorse for her actions, and wished she could undo the pain she had caused. She broke down as she said, "I don't know if I can be useful to anyone in this world or in any way, but I would like the opportunity to try." She acknowledged the pain inflicted on her daughters, laminating that it extended to future generations. Marissa also discussed her impending prison sentence, expressing hope that from behind bars, she could influence other inmates to make better life choices. Marissa's defense attorney, Alan Tavosley, embarked on an appeal to the jury, imploring them to save her life and portraying her as a victim of a tragic childhood. He revealed that as a child, Marissa had suffered sexual abuse from her stepfather and endured emotional abuse from her mother, with no protective adults in her life. Addressing the jury, he emphasized, the world is not a safe place for her. However, skepticism arose when it was uncovered that Marissa had requested her daughters be given to her stepfather and mother, raising doubts about the veracity of her claims. During the sentencing hearing, Dr. Janine DeMarte diagnosed Marissa with antisocial personality disorder and pointed out her lack of remorse, as evident in her jail phone calls. Following the testimony, the jury commenced deliberations, taking 3 days to determine Marissa's fate. Instead of imposing the death penalty, they sentenced her to life in prison. One of her defense attorneys, Andrew Clemency, expressed relief outside the court, stating, "We're happy with the decision they made. Thank God. They made a decision to spare a life." A subsequent hearing was scheduled to determine whether Marissa would spend her life in prison or become eligible for parole after serving 25 years. Marissa's defense sought the more lenient sentence, emphasizing her lack of a criminal record, deep remorse for the murder, and her efforts to seek counseling to understand her actions. The judge also heard pleas for leniency from Marissa's daughters. Rhiannon, the eldest daughter, asserted that even if Marissa had attacked Dale, he would still have loved her had he survived. Dale's family also provided impact statements. Her sister, Melinda Artrup, expressed anger at Marissa's portrayal of Dale as an abuser, asserting that she had tarnished his name and taken away the chance for him to witness his daughter's milestones. She laminated the loss of her brother's presence at graduations and weddings. Ultimately, Maricopa County Superior Court Judge Roland Steinley sentenced Marissa to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He rejected the claims that Marissa had killed Dale due to domestic violence and instead believed that greed had driven her actions. He noted that if not for Marissa's daughters, she might have received a death sentence. And that, dear listeners, brings a close to these True Crime Cases, Volume 16. I'd like to take a moment and acknowledge the rest of the membership of Back to Ashes. Thank you so much for your loyal dedication and for sticking by the channel side and for sticking by my side. As I always like to say, without you, I don't have a voice. This channel would not exist. And I be sitting here talking to nobody, so thank you so much. It does not go unnoticed. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you comfortably. If you're awake, I hope you've enjoyed these selections. Until next time, please take care of yourselves, and please stay vigilant. I'll be reading to you soon. Have yourselves a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening. Peace, love, and light to you all.